Hello everyone, and welcome to a new series. This is the first official episode of the Gaming Book Club. Today, joining me is Afro Architect. A little bit ago, we both played Jitsu Squad, and we're meeting today to go over our thoughts on it. However, before we do, what's up Afro? Give me a brief introduction about yourself. What kind of games do you like? What genres?
Hi, I'm Afro Architect, a fellow YouTuber. I do reviews and videos on anything that interests me, from Halo to Crackdown, action games of all kinds, and I even have a video looking into the design of beat-em-ups over the years. I am a lifelong fan of games, and I love the art form.
Hey, well it's lovely to meet you, and thanks for joining the show. For those who are interested in Afro's work, please look down in the comment section, as his channel will be pinned down there.
Thank you for having me, Zeal.
It's great to have you. Now let's get into Jitsu Squad. The first thing we're going to touch on is the gameplay, as I found it to be the most important component. Let's start off by explaining the premise. Jitsu Squad is a beat-em-up about saving the world from unending doom. In each stage, we work to take out enemies and bosses while staying alive. It's a traditional beat-em-up in that regard. Plus, as with many beat-em-ups, there's a detailed moveset for my main character to make sure I have the capabilities to take out enemies in time. This game specifically focuses on aerial, fast-paced combat, encouraging me to fly through stages and enemies quickly, while avoiding as much damage as I could. I found these systems to be engaging. It was easy to find different moves to pair together, so I constantly felt like I was in control. Moreover, I continually found neat ways to dismantle my foes. The different combat sequences were interesting, even as I continued to spend time with the game. What did you think, Afro?
Yeah, I agree that combat has a good sense of control. I enjoyed unlocking new moves for my character, and I never felt any were useless. I appreciate that they have many combos with a short pause, which is a simple way to add depth to combat. I think they could have looked at how Solstice handles them by having a visual indicator to show how long to pause between attacks, which removes the guesswork. I mainly stuck to combining basic combos, special attacks, and juggling, which was fun enough. I liked the different directional attacks, which all worked pretty well. I liked how they handled secondary weapons. They have their own energy bar, which can be restored by finding vials. This gave me a clear indicator for how much energy was left in my weapon. They do have a couple of secondaries for each character, and I think it would have been a good idea to give them out a little more frequently to give the player more choices with how they want to approach each battle, since every type has unique attacks. But they sadly didn't do that, with them only giving out one at a time, and by the time you got another, the first was already out of energy. Even with the decent sized move list, I mainly stuck to basic combos, parrying and juggling. I never felt pushed to try new things. There is a scoring system in the game, but they never gave me an actual rating to go along with the score, so it never pushed me to be faster or more creative. The best way to force players to approach encounters differently is with unique foes, but sadly, Jitsu Squad failed to do this. The enemy design never made me vary my approach. Every enemy can be handled the same way, and each type has only one or two unique attacks, which makes their differences negligible. There is solid visual variety, but they never turn that into mechanical variety. Bosses do add a bit of variety because they have more moves to learn, along with periods where they are invincible. The bosses could still be juggled a bit, but those moments of invincibility forced me to play more defensive. And those fights are the only ones that have me feel the need to mix offense and defense in a unique way.
Yeah, I agree. The enemies really didn't push me to get better at the game. Many of the standard enemies were overly simple to take out, and many of their attack patterns were insanely simple. Half the time, I didn't even need to learn their patterns, as I could defeat them before they even got the chance to attack me. I didn't find much fulfillment from intricate or interesting enemy designs. Still, in some of the final levels, there were some decently tricky enemies integrated, but that was mostly because the developers increased their health. Obviously, dealing more damage to take out enemies will increase the difficulty. Overall though, I didn't find fulfillment in taking out the enemies. Though I didn't love the enemy designs, I did enjoy many of the boss fights. Initially, I found them a bit tedious, as I hadn't gotten accustomed to the controls. However, as I became more familiar with Jitsu Squad, I found these components to be a lot of fun. These foes clearly telegraphed their attacks and gave me ample time to react, helping me feel powerful and in control. Sometimes, some of these foes did seem to have a lot of health, but I still had a lot of fun with these fights. However, despite enjoying these boss fights, I think the game had a bit of a difficulty dilemma. There were some components of the game that were incredibly easy. Despite playing on the normal difficulty and not being traditionally good at beat-em-ups, I had no issues cruising through the game. It's not like I didn't die though. It's just that the way that Jitsu Squad handled lives and death is ridiculous. First, they gave me 3 lives. This is typical, so I wasn't overly surprised. Upon death, I lost a life. Again, this makes total sense. However, when I lose all 3, I usually have no idea what happens. It's like there are hidden checkpoints that serve as a respawn point. This meant that when I ran out of lives entirely, I would usually respawn at a point barely a minute or 2 away from where I was. Though it sounds like I'm complaining about this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I do wish that there were fewer checkpoints, as it would reward me for a more stellar performance, but I don't think that's my primary gripe with this system. Instead, I truly disliked how I didn't begin every level with 3 lives. If I really wanted to be particular about it, I could of course just deplete all my lives until I respawned in with 3, but that's silly and I didn't want to do that. I wish the developers just set my lives to 3 before each level, especially since dying was so inconsequential. But maybe this is just my experience. What did you think, Afro?
I completely agree on the lives thing. Not starting with 3 lives gave an artificial difficulty to sections, which was fairly annoying. It's standard to do in games like this, so I have no idea why the devs neglected it. In terms of challenge, I found it to be lacking as well. Most of the times I died was from getting juggled by enemies. Everyone has easy to read telegraphs, and the window for countering successfully is high, so spamming that counter button was my go-to strategy for a lot of fights, especially boss fights, and one that the game didn't try to punish me or force me to change, not in terms of enemies or encounter design. Which brings me to the levels. The levels on offer are the most basic implementation of beat-em-up stages. Simple, linear levels with no unique obstacles or interactions. Levels only feature the player traveling from left to right, fighting a gauntlet of enemies. A few exceptions are the lava level, which features the player surfing over lava, which is straight out of the TMNT beat-em-up games, and the train level. Both aren't a huge departure from this basic setup, which is a shame because each level has its own theme which could have been reflected in gameplay. Lava pits, poison zones, and any kind of level geometry besides long rectangle. At least combine different rectangles or something, please. Having unique obstacles could have allowed for me to approach them differently since I have hazards to avoid. We've already mentioned how enemy design was lacking, and it could have been somewhat offset if the levels brought something unique to each zone.
That's exactly how I felt. The level designs were totally lacking. Except for maybe the train level like you mentioned, the unique level themes had almost no impact on gameplay. Sure, there were a few unique level themes, but there were so few stage hazards or residual effects that nothing really made each level stand out. Especially considering that I wasn't overly enthralled with the enemy designs, the lack of unique stages left me quite disappointed. Finally, the game features a cartoon aesthetic that looks super cool in the trailer. I was super stoked to see what the developers did with it. However, as I continued through the game, I noticed that the story was super underwhelming, and that there was nothing overly exciting in terms of world building. In fact, I particularly disliked some of the profane humor. It's not even that I'm opposed to the existence of lewd jokes, but they were just not funny, and instead made me feel embarrassed to be playing through the game. The art and sound design were solid, there's no denying that. However, the vision of the developers simply didn't align with mine, so I think the world building left a lot for me to desire. Afro, did you agree?
I totally agree. The story wasn't anything special, and the jokes didn't land either. The game never made me feel invested in the world created or the characters. The members of the squad felt interchangeable since they all have similar sense of humor and personality, which is a shame because of how solid their designs are. Overall, Jitsu Squad is a decent game, but nothing special. Other beat-em-up games have surpassed it in every way, and the asking price is too high. Jitsu Squad doesn't have the same depth in its combat of a Streets of Rage 4, or the breadth of content of a River City Girls.
I agree. Despite enjoying the movement and primary gameplay loop, Jitsu Squad did not have nearly enough distinct components to keep me hooked. I liked the main characters, the neat abilities I had, and the visuals. However, the lack of depth and tension combined with the odd theming to diminish my satisfaction. Overall, I did not feel zeal for Jitsu Squad.